The All Blacks don't know anything about their opposition. That was a story that popped up in The Sun today. Why The Sun popped up in my news feed, I'm not sure what Google is trying to tell me about my browsing habits. But there was this story from Chris Ashton basically saying that the All Blacks ahead of this game against England. The All Blacks don't know anything about the English squad. They don't know any of the players. And it goes back to a press conference from 2014 where Brodie Retallick was asked, I think basically what he thought of the England squad. And he said he only knew a couple of the players. And they asked him, I think directly, like which ones. And he said Michael Laws. Not quite right. So he basically didn't know any of them by name anyway. I mean, that's... I'm not sure that's anything to be too worried about. The names of players get pretty hard, and I certainly don't know as many England players as I do New Zealand players. I'd probably know more South Africans and Australians, even perhaps Argentinians compared to some of those England, or at least the Premiership squads and whatnot. So we've all got different levels of knowledge. I suppose the assumption is that if you're a professional rugby player, you should know something about your opposition. You should know who the key guys to watch are, and you should have been scouring through video footage to learn all their plays and stuff. But Brodie didn't know any of their names, and Chris Ashton recently said that in his time with Toulon, when he talked to guys like Malakai Fekitoa, that Malakai didn't know what the Premiership was, didn't know what the Heineken Cup was, that he was pretty much ignorant as to the ways of rugby in England and in Europe generally. Brad Shields has kind of come out and defended that and basically said, well, New Zealand guys are more focused on Super Rugby and Mitre 10 Cup and things like that, which, I mean, to be fair, I would say is a pretty normal thing for New Zealand fans as well. I can't remember, when you're watching the news, there's not really anything about European rugby unless it's the Six Nations, and if there is a news story from some kind of club competition, be it Premiership, Pro 14 or Champions Cup, whatever, it's probably, if it's about a New Zealand player who's scored a couple of tries or something like that, it's pretty few and far between. From what I've seen, when you look at those kind of All Blacks behind the scenes videos where they get a little bit about their personal lives, I've never seen any of them really mention European rugby. I mean, it seems like a few of them are into the NFL or the NBA. They seem to be more leaning towards the American sports and video games and things like that. So it doesn't seem to be high on the radar. But should it be? I suppose is a question. Do they kind of need to scout? It got me thinking about the state of New Zealand rugby, and they're the top team. So the whole idea is, do they need to scout? And I was thinking back to other sports, and cricket is the first one that came to mind. I haven't really followed cricket for quite some time, but I do remember, and it's never been my number one sport, I've loosely followed it, but the New Zealand cricket team's never been the best team, never been the most blessed with like depth and talent, but they were often able to get results by doing kind of unconventional things. Like, they were one of the first, I mean, this is all anecdotal stuff, so don't quote me on anything cricket related, but I seem to remember them being one of the first teams to really, really focus on their fielding. Like, it's always about batting and bowling in cricket, but I seem to remember them taking the fielding absolutely seriously, coming up with innovations in that area to try and compensate perhaps for a lack of talent in other areas. And another area that they tried to focus on was the scouting of other players. So Australia were the top dog in cricket for a long time, and really focusing on which batsmen had weaknesses for which shots, where they were likely to hit it, and where the bowlers, what kind of deliveries they would do, and what like slower balls or whatever they used, and how to pick them, that kind of thing. And I guess New Zealand punched above its weight in cricket, didn't win any World Cups or anything, but put in decent results and sometimes upset bigger teams. Using that kind of inside knowledge, all that scouting, video review, that kind of stuff. But it's cricket. And cricket's a game where it's a lot of 1v1. It's the bowler against the batsman until the ball goes out into the field. So you can kind of target that stuff. But rugby is not a game where you can be sure any one situation is going to be the same from game to game. So I'm trying to just justify how... I mean, obviously it's important to scout your team, but is it important to know the names of every other player? I guess information is important. But it seems like, at least from what I remember about the original Brodie Fratellik interview, it's basically we're going to play our game and that should be enough. New Zealand did win that series 4 years ago, 3-0. A couple of the games were close, the third one wasn't. So it seemed to work. I've got my Chiefs hat on for Brodie, by the way. But yeah, I mean, I have heard also, I remember listening to Off the Ball a while back and them talking about, I forget which coach it was that had been down in New Zealand, but talking about watching video of some of the All Blacks players in preparation for the games, whereas the All Blacks guys did more skills work than video review, and especially with stuff like broken play, watching the video to see what they were going to do in broken play situations, and the guys, I forget which All Blacks coach they said it, but basically saying, we don't necessarily coach them on specific things to do when there's broken play. They're just going to do what they're going to do. It's a heads up play. So studying the video is kind of pointless because even we don't know what they're going to do and we are the coaches. So I don't know, it just had me thinking, how important is it to these guys that they scout the players, that they know the names of their opposition? I mean, it's a big game. It's the first time in 4 years that these teams have played. So I guess we'd like to think that the players are focusing on it every minute of every day, but perhaps they're just sitting there playing Fortnite rather than worrying about too much about the opposition. I don't know. What do you guys reckon? Is this just a story to kind of stir things up before the game? Is it the fact that the All Blacks don't need to scout? Or do you think perhaps they're just looking at tactics of the opposition generally? And I mean, I'm not in there with whatever the All Blacks coaches are doing. Are they just coaching their own skills? Or perhaps just looking at England generally without focusing too much about, you know, what individual players are going to do on the opposition? Because as I said, it's rugby. It's harder to predict, you know, what situations you're going to come across. I also remember James Haskell, when he did an interview with the Highlanders when he was with them, he basically said that none of his teammates really knew anything about the European team. So, as I said, as a Kiwi, I definitely know far less about the European games than what I do about the Southern Hemisphere stuff. I'm trying to improve my knowledge all the time. But how important is it for the players? You guys let me know your thoughts, and yeah, I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.